Welcome to the Money and Meaning Show with Jeff Bernier, a show dedicated to helping you gain the confidence and freedom to lead a life of personal significance and help you get your actions and resources in alignment with what matters most.
Well, hello and welcome to the Money and Meaning Show. My name is Jeff Bernier. I am happy that you decided to spend a few minutes with me today as we continue to explore how to create a life of freedom and purpose and meaning by having good, solid financial plans in place to give you the clarity and confidence to go live a great life as you define it. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome someone who works at the intersection of freedom, generosity, and purpose. Harrison Miller with the Charitable Planning Coordinator at Fidelity Charitable, the nation's largest grantmaker, if you can believe that. Harrison works with families, advisors, and business owners and helps them give more strategically, tax efficiently, and most importantly, with more clarity around what matters most and how to make an impact. Harrison, thanks for being here today, buddy.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Really glad to have you. You know, we visited recently and of course our firm works with Fidelity's platform. And I just thought it's just an important topic, especially as we're trying to be thoughtful and strategic around charitable giving. But when I do these shows, I always like to start personal. So would love just to hear a little bit about you and your family and your career path and sort of how you ended up at Fidelity Charitable.
I've been with Fidelity Charitable for almost 15 years. It'll be 15 next year, which is pretty hard to believe. I'm from the Boston area originally. Went to UMass Amherst, corporate finance major at UMass Amherst. I knew a couple of Fidelity Charitable employees at the time, and the more I learned about Fidelity Charitable, it's a really unique intersection between finance and philanthropy. That was what really drew me to the group, and I was really fortunate to start there right out of college. More on our service side at the time, servicing advisors that have existing giving accounts and answering their questions. 2 years into my career, we opened an office in Raleigh, Durham that ultimately became our headquarters. So I moved down there in 2013, 2014 and moved over to our fundraising organization at the time. I spent about 3.5 years in the Raleigh, Durham area in very much phone-based roles, helping advisors, attorneys, and accountants with planning opportunities for donor advised funds. And I kind of knew all along I'd be very interested in being an external client-facing person. So I was able to move to Atlanta for the role that I have now, doing much of the same, but in person, talking about the different planning opportunities for those folks in the Southeast region. My mom's from Atlanta, so Atlanta was a very familiar place. I ultimately met my wife down here as well. And we have a 21-month-old and a dog, and live on the Beltline in the old Fourth Ward area of town.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. So tell me a little bit about your work. What do you find rewarding about working with donors and advisors as they work with their clients in the area of generosity and giving?
What really motivates me is presenting. So we're not tax professionals, but we are in the business of presenting tax efficient ways to give, giving what's most appreciated in the portfolio over writing a check to charity or giving with your credit card. So I always like presenting those solutions to the advisor so that they can present it to their donor, make them, look very good for presenting the solution that's going to be the best for them. And while I do talk to a lot of advisors that are representing the donors, it's always great to have those conversations directly with the end donors. And it's a very applicable time of year to be talking about this. As you know, Jeff, and I'm sure a lot of people listening do too, a lot of charitable giving is happening right now. For a lot of people, the low basis stock that's appreciated over the course of the year is a great asset to give. And you really enjoy those conversations, pointing that out to people and making it as easy as possible to fund with an asset like that.
Gotcha. We'll get into that a little bit in a moment in terms of, potential strategies that people might consider. So tell me about Fidelity Charitable. How long has Fidelity had this part of the organization? I mean, most people are familiar with Fidelity, obviously, But tell me about Fidelity Charitable. How do y'all work and support donors in particular as compared to maybe other organizations, or sort of what's the mandate?
Yeah, great question. So donor advised funds, believe it or not, have been around since the 30s, mostly in the form of like community foundations that have donor advised fund programs. Fidelity came along in 1991, and was the first financial services organization to sponsor a donor advised fund, and Schwab and Vanguard came along shortly thereafter. What's great about Fidelity Charitable as a large national donor advised fund provider, and this is a term we use a lot, but it's true, is we do a lot to democratize philanthropy. So make philanthropy available for everyone.
Yeah.
We don't have a minimum to open a donor advised fund, and trends over the years in the donor advised fund space. But what's great about what we do is that it's really available at all levels, and there's a lot of great parts of the organization services that you can take advantage of depending on what level you choose to open the donor advised fund at.
Okay. So prior to Fidelity and the other custodians or other financial institutions getting into space, these donor advised funds were primarily sponsored by local community foundations. Then you guys and Vanguard and Schwab and others said, look, why don't we create our own fund to support our clients that want to do this sort of nationally, I guess.
And I think the most important thing to know is that it was an effort to make it available to everybody.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
what community foundations do so well is they give you, consultative feedback. What are the top charities within the mission of that foundation that need your help? All sorts of philanthropic advice channels that come with it, and consequently, that's what can make their fees a little bit more. So what you see with the national donor advised funds, and Fidelity Charitable being one of those, is that it's a low cost vehicle. I would unofficially describe it as like a do-it-yourselfer vehicle, where if you know where you want to give, you just go online. Most of the time, make the gift online. You can make gifts on your phone as well. Very easy from a service and technology standpoint, and low cost as well.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the donor advised fund. I mean, that's what this is. So let's just do generic for a minute about what a donor advised fund is. The audience of this show has heard about them, and our clients are certainly familiar with them, but a lot of people aren't. So can you just make this sort of basic? Tell us what a donor advised fund is and how it works.
The simplest way that I can explain it, like if I was like in an elevator talking to somebody about it and we had a few minutes, is that it's a great way to give in the tax year that it makes sense to give in. And then you're able to grow what you give tax free. And then when you're ready to start making gifts to your favorite charities, your alma mater, the soup kitchen down the street, the Humane Society, wherever, we help you facilitate those gifts. So what I'm doing in my role is predominantly helping folks with the front end of the donor advised fund, which is funding the donor advised fund. How are you giving into it? If you have something to give other than cash, do you have low basis, long-term appreciated securities that you can use to fund the donor advised fund, which is a great asset to give? And I'm sure we'll talk about why. Do you have other assets that you can give into the vehicle, such as non-publicly traded assets, which I'm sure we can talk about too? Let's say you're to put $50,000 into the vehicle today. Hopefully that means that you have 70, 80,000, maybe even more to give to your favorite charities over time with that tax-free growth.
So when you make the gift, it's a qualified gift to a charity when you make the gift to the fund, correct?
That's correct. So we're a donor advised fund, but we're also a 501c3. So from a deductibility standpoint, that's what merits the ability for an individual to be eligible for that tax deduction when they make the gift into the vehicle.
Right. So the deduction occurs in the year you make the gift to the fund, regardless of when you choose to make the grant to the ultimate charity.
That's correct. So investment growth is tax-free. It's after the gift. And then the gifts that you make out of the vehicle to the University of Georgia, let's say, the tax event is not when you make the gift to UGA. It's when you fund the donor advised fund.
Right. So it's a great technique to plan the years you want the deductions, even though you may be giving the gift away in the future.
That's exactly right. So it's, let's say you have clients that are experiencing a high income year. They're having some sort of liquidity event that's creating a tax event for that individual. That's exactly right, Jeff. It's picking the years that make sense to make the large strategic gift. Then you're able to make the gifts out to the end charities on your own timetable. We find that individuals that fund donor advised funds are very active grant makers, which is great to see. But yes, you're ultimately picking the year to do this strategically from a gifting standpoint.
Right. Sometimes when we think about philanthropy, we think about really wealthy people, but you just sort of made this clear that this could be for everybody. Anybody that wanted to be strategic about their giving and control the timing of the deduction might consider a donor advised fund. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what we see quite a bit, this kind of dovetails into like the median profile of someone that has an account with us. But what we see quite a bit is people that are right on the cusp of the standard deduction or itemizing, but they give a certain amount to charity each year. They might want to pick one out of every few years to give. Maybe it's 3 or 4 years or sometimes even more worth of giving, so that it creates a year of significant itemization so that they can get a significant charitable deduction, or they're eligible for a significant charitable deduction in that year. And then in the years going forward, when they're taking the standard deduction, they're still gifting to their favorite charities. It's just out of the donor advised fund. And yeah, our median account size is $22,000.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, that is inclusive or democratic. A lot of people it's not just rich people that are doing donor advised funds for sure. Yeah. So we talk about this a lot on the show about being strategic in our planning. And this is specifically about being strategic about taking the tax deduction. So I know this has become much more popular as the standard deduction has gotten larger and larger. Fewer people are itemizing. So what you're referring to, I guess, is what we call bunching. So you basically take, if you're giving $5,000 a year to your church or $10,000 a year to your church, maybe you want to do 10 years or 5 years worth of gifts into the fund. So if you're giving $5,000 a year to your church, you might put $25,000 into the donor advised fund, get a deduction that year, which would put you over the standard deduction with the other items. And then you could still give it away to your church for the next 5 years out of the fund, but you bunched the tax deduction up into that 1 year. That's, I think, what you were.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that goes back to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, which was the doubling of the standard deduction. So what happened then, as you know, was that way less Americans were itemizing after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And one way for individuals to still receive a charitable deduction, and then on the back end, charities still being able to receive annual commitments from their donors, is bunching. We use that same term as well. So picking a year, doing, a number of years worth of gifting in 1 year so that individual itemizes, is eligible for the deduction. And then, yeah, I think equally important for people that do bunch, that the charities on the receiving end, they're not seeing any bumps or hiccups in the annual commitments because they're still able to come out of the donor advised fund to the end charities.
You're still making the gifts to the charities that you care about. You're just accelerating the deduction into 1 year to basically save taxes because you take the itemized deduction that particular year. You've talked a couple of times about low basis securities. So walk us through why using low basis securities is a good idea in a donor advised fund.
The most common opportunity, and I touched on it for like a second right when we started, but so many Americans give cash to charity. They write checks, give with their credit card, however they do. It's something like 88% of American households give cash to charity each year. Again, we're not tax professionals, but one number that you see with us pretty consistently is that only about 30% of what comes in each year is cash. And then the other 70% is something that is long-term appreciated, whether it's publicly traded or privately held. What's great about long-term appreciated securities, which are securities that have been held for a year or more, is that it's really a two-sided deduction. So the donor is eligible for a fair market value tax deduction up to 30% of their adjusted gross income. And then they do not pay capital gains taxes upon the sale of the asset because a 501c3 public charity is selling the securities instead of them. So there's really two sides to the deduction. And in a year like this, knock on wood, for the final 15 or so days of the year, the market's very, very appreciated. And so the conversation with a lot of people becomes, there are a number of securities in the portfolio that are very appreciated. There'd be capital gains tax exposure if we were to sell them. You're philanthropically inclined. There's this tax event coming up. Whatever the situation is, the low basis stock that has been held for a year or more is always going to be a great asset to give because of the two-sided benefit of the deduction and the individual not paying the capital gains taxes.
Right. Yeah. So even if you like the security, it's a really good way to raise your basis, which will save you taxes later as well. So if you've got a security that you like and you're giving money to charity anyway, you could give the highly appreciated security to the donor advised fund. And then instead of using your cash to charity, use your cash just to rebuy the security, raise your basis. So if you sell it later, you'll pay less in taxes. We've got a client just recently that gave around $175,000 worth of Uber stock that he's owned for several years into a donor advised fund. I think his basis was like $20,000 or $30,000. So he got a $150,000 tax deduction. And again, all the capital gains were pretty much eliminated inside the fund. And he'll make the gift to his ultimate charities over the next several years. So talk about what's in the fund. So if I either give cash or appreciated securities, the stock gets liquidated, it gets diversified, I suppose, inside the fund. So what happens in the fund itself before grants are made out to the charities? Who controls the underlying holdings?
Yeah, great question. So when someone opens a donor advised fund, there's really two different directions based on the dollar amount that's in the donor advised fund that an individual can go. The first avenue that's available to everyone, no minimum for participating in this part of the program, is there are 25 investment options that all donors can choose from. They're preset options that act a lot like mutual funds. They're the underlying assets of Fidelity mutual funds, a number of mutual funds outside of Fidelity as well, so that the donor can participate and hopefully see that tax-free growth over time. The second option, and this comes into play when a donor advised fund is over $100,000, is a registered investment advisor, such as yourself, Jeff. I know your firm's in the program, where the registered investment advisor can actively manage the donor advised fund. So that is designed to act much like any other account that someone may have at Fidelity Investments, or if it's somewhere else that's eligible for the program. Fidelity Charitable essentially takes care of the gift administration from that investment account, if that makes sense.
That's it. Yeah. So inside the fund itself, you have control over how it's allocated, how much risk you take, your overall allocation, your objectives in terms of how you want to allocate it. And a lot of that is driven by how soon you're going to gift the money out. If you're planning on gifting the money out in its entirety in the next 2 or 3 years, you probably don't want to take a lot of risk with it. But if this is designed to be almost like an endowment where you're going to give a little bit away over a 20-year period or so, then you can obviously accept a little bit more uncertainty in the underlying investments. But the key point you made, which I think is important, is that you still have control over how it's allocated, kind of like a 401k. You get to allocate it within the fund.
The donor can pick from those 25, or the advisor on behalf of the donor can pick from those 25 investment options, and there's no maximum allocation for any of the 25. You can really pick and choose how you'd like there. And then within the investment advisor option, we do have investment guidelines to make sure that it's a diversified portfolio. They don't come up very much. One thing that we may talk about from time to time is we just ask that no more than 25% of the portfolio be a single stock, and alternative investments are on a case-by-case basis. But you get the idea. It's whether you go the 25 investment option route or an advisor's managing it, it's a diversified portfolio. And then, as you said, there's the ability to take on more or less risk based on the investment guidelines as well.
Yeah, while we're on the mechanics a little bit, so if I want to make a grant to a charity, how does that work?
About 95%, probably more than that at this point, honestly, of our gifts are made online in some shape or form. So that can be either through fidelitycharitable.org directly, or we have an iPhone and Android app for Fidelity Charitable. We've given to a little over 460,000 charities life to date. So pretty good chance that the organization's one that's in our database. In the rare event that it's not, we will reach out to that charity to confirm all their information, get them inputted into our database so that we can make the gifts. We say that our turnaround time is 2 to 10 business days. I would say very frequently it's close to 2. So
Right.
very quick, especially if you're going that online route. We do accept gifts. We can write checks, but our preference is for electronic funds transfer, and about 2/3 of the organizations of the 460,000 are signed up for electronic funds transfer, which does help with the processing time and getting the gifts to the organization. So very quick once someone logs in to do it. And if you're a Fidelity Investments customer, you'll actually see your Fidelity Charitable account at the bottom of your brokerage accounts. You can click on your Fidelity Charitable account. It'll take you to our website if you didn't go there directly.
At their fidelity.com.
Correct. So
Yeah.
what a lot of people will do is they'll go to fidelity.com, scroll all the way down, click on their charitable account. It takes you to fidelitycharitable.org, but your account's all pulled up, and then you can start gifting right there. There's just a grant recommendation button at the top, and it's 3 steps to make a gift.
Yeah. Now, I think it's important also to note that these aren't all large national charities. I mean, you can give it to your local church.
Yeah. So the full scope is 501c3 public charities, religious organizations, or government entities. Religious organizations, they may not proactively be in our database based on how they file. If it is a small church that we have not given to before, we would just need to connect with that church first to get their documentation and put them in our database. Yeah.
Gotcha. So you talked a little bit about things that aren't public security. So how do people give non-public assets to a donor-advised fund, like real estate or parts of a business or even artwork or things like that? How would that work with Fidelity Charitable?
I do full several webinars on this topic, so I'll try to keep it short. But the short story a lot of times is commercial real estate, private equity as well. Cryptocurrency, believe it or not, is a relatively new asset that we've been accepting. The bulk of the privately held assets that we do accept, though, are the closely held business interests that you mentioned. The deduction is the same as giving the publicly traded securities. It's full fair market value. You're eliminating capital gains tax. And if you're a business owner, the basis in your company is probably 0, so very tax efficient asset to give. But the mechanics of gifting are a lot different. And the short story is, if someone is a business owner and they know they want to be charitable after the sale of their company, the idea is donating a portion of the company ahead of the sale of the company, which is very important. You need to make that gift ahead of any legally binding definitive agreement to sell, which almost always is in the form of a purchase and sale agreement. We need to collect documentation on this business that we're actually going to be a brief minority shareholder in before the transaction consummates. We need to work with the company counsel to ultimately draw up an assignment of the interest to Fidelity Charitable. And then on the back end, so once we are a 5% shareholder, the second big question for us is, what is Fidelity Charitable's exit? How are we going to exit this privately held asset? And it's always good if there are potential buyers waiting in the wings. There is that liquidity that upcoming. And I would say 80% of the time we exit an asset within 3 months. We can go out to about a year on the liquidity piece. So we say yes to these about half the time. When we say no, it's because it's too late. The definitive agreement's already been signed, or the liquidity is either unknown or really prolonged. And then the last thing I'll say, just high level, like difference between gifting publicly traded and privately held. There is a valuation requirement for gifts of privately held assets. So that is a consideration for making the gift. It is an out-of-pocket expense to the donor. For anything over $10,000, they do need a third-party independent appraisal for the value of what they gave. They don't need to get it when they make the gift. They can wait till as late as tax time of the following year to get that appraisal. But that is a consideration.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pre-planning has to go on. I mean, you've got to say, okay, is this something I would consider? And then obviously you've got to figure out your interest in the business, because you may not be the only owner, and obviously work with legal counsel and making sure that you understand kind of what you're doing here and why you're doing it. But it's the benefits are huge, because again, you're saving a capital gain on the fair market value of the shares that you contribute, and you're getting a tax deduction for those amounts. So you're not only are you escaping the capital gain, you're getting an upfront tax deduction that you may not get to use all in 1 year, depending on the size of the transaction, your income, but a pretty significant tax deduction. So a lot of reasons to consider it in the right set of circumstances. Let's talk a little bit about the non-financial benefits. I know I've seen people use donor-advised funds. I used to call them sort of a poor man's foundation because it's a way to teach future generations generosity and have them be part of the process. Have you seen people use them that way as ways to teach the next generation about generosity and how people might have used them for that purpose?
Absolutely. Yeah. I see a lot of families that are incorporating the next generation into their donor advised fund, and whether that's meeting annually or on some other cadence to talk about where the family is going to give. We have a number of resources on our website for creating a mission statement for the donor advised fund that the family can ultimately adhere to. We have a really unique tool that a lot of families will use as well. It's called our Gift for Giving tool, which is, instead of making a grant to a charity, it's essentially like sending out a charitable gift certificate to an individual. And it's a link. All you need is an email address. You click the link. It's a pop-up giving account. That individual, and let's say it is someone in the next generation, has 180 days to make a gift with the funds, and then you can come back as a family to talk about where you gave and why you did it.
Well, that's fair neat. So what is that called again? What do y'all call that?
Gift for Giving, or G for G for short. But it's an option when you go through and make a gift. And then also, I just kind of rounding out that topic, we have a group. It's called our private donor group. It's dedicated to accounts that are 3 million or more. Within that group, there are dedicated relationship managers or philanthropic strategists that help families with their gifting, and a lot of what they're doing is geared towards incorporating the next generation as well.
Very cool. I like it. That's really neat. This gift to giving feature. So basically, if I'm a donor, I have a fund. If I want to, I'm basically giving someone else the opportunity to make a grant. I can give it like a dollar amount that I designate.
Yeah, it's just got to be a minimum of $50. I think it goes from 50 to 5,000, and then it expires after 180 days. So that individual, it's like a pop-up giving account. They can go in and make the gifts once they click the link that they receive via email.
Okay. So you've got a grantor who creates the fund, makes the contributions. You've got the beneficiaries who are basically the people that the grantor makes grants to periodically, the charities. What happens to the fund if the grantor dies?
We have 3 general avenues that you can go in for successorship on the donor advised fund. And obviously you could combine between the 3. The first is naming individuals like family members, children. You could also have an executor as well to be the successor on the donor advised fund. And our general practice is to create new donor advised funds for each successor. So let's say there were 4 children. Each child would have their own donor advised fund. And then let's say it was 25% to each child. There would be transfers upon death to each child. There would be 4 transfers from matriarch and patriarch's donor advised fund to each of the 4 children's donor advised funds. The second option is just having lump sum payouts go out to the charities that are listed. So let's say an individual had 5 to 10 charities on there. You could have the assets go directly out to those. And then the final option, it's kind of a hybrid giving option. We call it our endowed giving program, where you can have percentage disbursements go out to charity each year, or you can have gifts go out to charities over like a specific period of time. So if you're doing the percentage disbursements, it'd be minimum of 5% per year, maximum of 10 charities. But like, let's say you wanted to do 5% to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta every year. You make that gift once a year of the 5%, and then the rest is simultaneously invested. Or you could do, let's say, a gift to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta that would be over a 25-year. And that solution makes a lot of sense for people that obviously want the more prolonged giving, leaving a legacy type of thing. And then I think specifically as well, maybe someone that does not have any heirs, last remaining family member, something like that.
Right. You make that choice when you set up the fund.
Correct.
Okay. Can you change your mind on what you decide to do? Before you die, obviously.
Yeah. At any point you can. I'm glad you brought that up, because that kind of dovetails into a bigger picture reason why a lot of people will use a donor advised fund in their estate plan, let's say. So naming the donor advised fund as the beneficiary to, let's say, your IRA or in your will, all you need to do is name the donor advised fund at Fidelity Charitable as the successor. And then to answer your question directly, yes, you can update the successor charities, successor individuals over time, and very easy to do on our website versus having to amend an estate plan. And maybe there's a fee involved with amending an estate plan. And then the second reason why that makes a lot of sense is at the passing of the individuals on the account, it's a lot easier for charities to receive the funds if they are coming to Fidelity Charitable first. Fidelity has a group dedicated to pulling the assets over from wherever they were held versus having the charities, and let's say some of those charities are very small, reach out to wherever the assets are held and they have to open a brokerage account over there, pull the assets over, versus if it's through the donor advised fund, they're just receiving a check or an electronic funds transfer.
Yeah, just as an advisory firm, I mean, the administrative burdens that you guys take off of us with low basis securities is so much easier than making a low basis security gift to a small entity. They're not used to dealing with it frequently. That's very helpful. So I know in the most recent Tax Act, there was a small limitation on how much we can give to charity. It's pretty immaterial for most people, I think. But what are the other trends or changes that are going on in philanthropy or in charitable giving these days, or other things you see around the corner?
Yeah, a great question. I would say there's a couple that, are on kind of different sides of the spectrum. And I touched on one of them, which is that the donor advised fund's really available for everyone. I think even, 10 or 15 years ago, it was an afterthought that, you opened a private foundation at a certain dollar amount. And that just really isn't the case anymore. In 2010, the ratio of donor advised funds rather, being open to foundations in the United States was 2-to-1. And today it's somewhere around 10 or 11-to-1, which tells you...
You mean 2 donor advised funds for 1 foundation?
Yep, in 2010. And now today it's like 10 or 11-to-1. And I think what that tells you is that the donor advised fund makes a lot of sense at any dollar amount, even those higher ones. And we have that group I think I told you about, dedicated to donors at the $3 million level. We also have a group dedicated to accounts at the $100 million level. So people are realizing everything that I'm looking to accomplish philanthropically can be done out of the donor advised fund in a lot of different instances. Again, going back to our median being $22,000, there's really a lot of reason for people at, very, very different dollar amounts to use the donor advised fund. And when I'm talking to financial advisors, attorneys, or accountants, and we're having the conversation about donor advised funds or private foundations, and again, maybe 15 years ago, it was definitely go the private foundation route because it's this big. Now those conversations are, okay, well, why would you want the private foundation? Are you paying staff? Are you trying to be boots on the ground at the charities that you want to support? Is the family trying to manage the money or ultimately make gifts where they're selecting the individuals for the gifts? If they're not doing very specific things, again, at larger dollar amounts, but those very specific things, the donor advised fund is very likely going to be cheaper. There's no filing requirement every year like there is with a private foundation. This is more qualitative, but the next generation seems to like the ease of donor advised funds. And maybe that comes from the gifting online, the simplicity of gifting online versus meetings, talk about where the 5% is going to go, or, whatever the circumstances are there. That's why we're seeing folks open donor advised funds at much larger dollar amounts as well.
Yeah. Well, and all of you guys have gotten quite large. Has there been anything legislatively or any concerns about the size of these funds now? And occasionally politicians, try to make news, but any concerns about those kind of issues?
It's always something to consider or pay attention to. I think the biggest, it's not even really at the forefront right now, but to pay attention to with donor advised funds is that there's no payout requirement on the IRS level with donor advised funds. But however, and I was planning on talking about this anyway, the average payout on a donor advised fund in the United States is 23%. The average payout on a private foundation is slightly higher than 5%. We're kind of going back to my comments at the beginning. What happens with a lot of people with that fund donor advised funds is they realize very quickly that they want to be active with their donor advised fund. That 23% per year is a average of 11 and a half gifts per year. Well, there's no payout requirement on the IRS level. Fidelity Charitable, we ask that all accounts make a gift once every 2 years. Again, what we find is that, people are proactively going to their donor advised fund and saying, hey, I have a lot of gifting I want to be doing this year.
From my standpoint, with the challenges that we have, humanity solving problems, government can't solve them all, and so the private sector has got to step in. The more we can encourage people and make it easy to help our neighbor and to help quality charitable organizations that are doing really great work, the better. So we should encourage it. But I get their concern about, you're just building up a lot of wealth that's just sitting there. But again, it never goes back to the donor. The person that made the contribution, they can't get it back. So it's not, sure, your future generations can give it away, but they're not going to get a benefit from it. Sometimes it's a problem looking for a solution, because it seems to me it's a good thing. The more we've got available to philanthropy to attack problems that we've got, the better. And I think we should support that as a society. So there's my soapbox. As an advisor and a capitalist, I want my clients to use the free bridges. That's what Judge Brandeis said, over 100 years ago is, it's our right as an American citizen to use the tax laws. You don't evade taxes, but you use the tax laws to your advantage. And certainly we can be better stewards if we direct our social capital as opposed to government directing our social capital.
The other thing I'll say that's related to what we're talking about with granting and utilizing the donor advised fund, I sit on a few boards of charities in Atlanta, and in times of market volatility or market downturn, charities do turn to donor advised funds, the funding for the year, when people are hesitant to give the low basis stock because markets aren't appreciated or what have you. In times of economic uncertainty, donor advised funds are a great way for individuals to make gifts to their favorite charities, because going back to the beginning, they funded the donor advised fund in the tax year that made sense. And even in some economic uncertainty, there's probably still some tax-free growth in the donor advised fund, and it's a great way to help out your favorite charities then.
Yeah, very helpful. Well, this has been great, Harrison. I know there's a lot we could talk about with some details and fine points of them, but what else would you like to share? I mean, are there other things that you think an audience of mid to late career business people that are either in retirement or soon to be there, that are thinking about how they want to impact society? Anything else you want to share about Fidelity or the funds or the idea in general?
We've touched on a lot, and we could definitely go into further detail on a lot of different topics, but everything changes from year to year. And what's a hot topic now is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and the tax changes that are going on there. And I would say for anyone listening to this podcast that is someone that gives on some sort of cadence, and they're a 37% tax filer, starting in 2026, you're actually treated as a 35% tax filer in terms of your deduction. And then there's a floor. You've got to give above and beyond 0.5% of your adjusted gross income to realize a charitable deduction. But I think the big piece is, if you do give and you're a 37% filer, you can make a gift this year and be treated as a 37% filer for the charitable deduction. But just going forward in 2026, it's capped at as if you're in the 35% tax bracket. So we're seeing a lot of those 37% filers make a gift one more time this year. And I use the same example, talking to the pre-retiree crowd or someone that's in one of the final years of working. If you're someone that gives, let's say it's $10,000 a year and you are in the 37% tax bracket, you might want to think about one more large gift or, one in the next few years before you drop to, let's say, the 24% tax bracket in retirement. So you're getting that charitable deduction at the 37% tax bracket amount. And then what we see a lot of people do is use the donor advised fund almost like a bridge to minimum required distributions when they turn 70 and a half.
Right.
Pre-fund the donor advised fund in a tax advantage way when you're in that high tax bracket. And then, maybe you have 10 plus years worth of gifting that you can utilize the donor advised fund for thereafter.
That's a great idea, and that's something that we do a lot. I know we may have talked about it on the show a lot. As you're getting in your final stages of your career, oftentimes you have liquidity events anyway. So you might have deferred compensation paying out, which creates ordinary income. And so it'd be good to get a lot of tax deductions in those years. And I think what you're referring to, which I think makes a lot of sense, is does it make sense to go ahead and bunch up whatever you're going to give to charity from, let's say you're retiring at 62, bunch up your deductions into, the last year or two of working, get the deduction, get it in the fund, then use the fund for charitable gifts to age 73. And then at age 73, you're forced to take money out of your IRA for required minimum distributions. And at that point, you might do something called qualified charitable distributions, where you're giving money from the IRA to charity. You won't be using the fund. So great idea on that. And we do that a lot. I'm glad you brought that up, because sort of think about phases here, but that first phase of retirement where you're not forced to take required distributions, you may not be taking Social Security, your income may be relatively low, so the tax deduction might not be that valuable to you. So get the tax deduction before you get there, and then use the fund in those years when you're a relatively low income year anyway. So, and those strategies are very helpful. Well, Harrison, this has been great. Thank you for filling us in on what's going on in the world of donor advised funds, and in Fidelity in particular, because you've got some features I wasn't even aware of. And I love the fact that it's, charitable giving for everybody. I think that's pretty cool. And of course, Fidelity's sort of known for that in terms of workplace investing and other things that Fidelity has done a good job, getting a lot of people investing. So thank you for that. How can people keep up with you or keep up with what's going on with Fidelity? How can they Fidelity Charitable?
Between now and year end, what a lot of people will do is go to fidelitycharitable.org. If it is a year that makes a lot of sense to open a donor advised fund, there's an open an account link at the top of the page, or you can work with your financial advisor to have them open the account as well. If you're a Fidelity Investments customer, it's going to pull up all of your Fidelity brokerage account information, where you can go in and fund a gift into the donor advised fund. Or, like I said before, your financial advisor might be able to do that for you too. But yeah, going forward, once you have an account, we have a monthly newsletter. There's a lot of great resources, like I said, on our site for creating mission statements, trying to see ways to utilize your donor advised fund once you've established it. But yeah, that's our website, fidelitycharitable.org. And I'm based in Atlanta, really covering the whole Southeast. I'm always happy to answer any specific questions that pertain to establishing a donor advised fund. And yeah, really any time of year. This is the time of year though, as you know, 60% of what comes in every year happens in about the final 6 weeks of the year.
Oh wow!
So yeah, whether it's now or throughout the course of the year, though, we're available to answer questions.
Yeah, well, this has been great, Harrison. Thank you again for your time, and thank you all for checking in with us. I hope you found this helpful, and if you enjoyed the show or like to give us a comment, please check us out where you stream your favorite podcast. Give us a rating, share it with a friend, and have a great day. Thanks for being with us. Be well.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you for listening to the Money and Meaning Show with Jeff Bernier, a show dedicated to help you gain the confidence and freedom to lead a life of personal significance and help you get your actions and resources in alignment with what matters most. We would love to hear from you. If you have any questions or comments on the show, feel free to reach out to us at moneyandmeaning@tandemgrowth.com, or you can find us on the web at www.tandemgrowth.com. Jeff Bernier is the President and Chief Investment Officer at Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. This show is a production of Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC. All information discussed is general in nature, is provided for informational purposes only, and should not be construed as specific financial, legal, or tax advice. Listeners should consult an attorney or tax professional regarding their specific legal or tax situation. Listeners should not rely on the content of this podcast as the basis for any investment decisions. A professional advisor should be consulted, and/or independent due diligence should be conducted before implementing anything discussed in this show. While information presented is believed to be factual and up to date, Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, does not guarantee its accuracy, and it should not be regarded as a complete analysis of the subjects discussed. Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, does not make any representations or warranties as to the accuracy, timeliness, suitability, completeness, or relevance of any information prepared by any unaffiliated third party, such as guests on the podcast, and takes no responsibility for the same.